And then, of course, the ubiquitous drop shadow. Because nothing really makes anything feel right until you actually give it some dimension, right? Because once you give it some dimension, all of a sudden it's like, now that looks really good. So there's your drop shadow. You go and you cast your drop shadow off to the side, and oh, that looks terrible on this one. We can't do the drop shadow on that one. Okay, we're gonna go do the drop shadow back on this one right here. Drop shadow, there we go. So the drop shadow back on this one here, the distance is just how far the drop shadow is going to cast, basically implying that the object is higher off page. The size, so it's going to kind of soften that glow, so the distance is really going to make that come off there, so we can make that really float. And again, we also have the different contours for our drop shadow, so it could create some type of really cool crop circle, you know, under there. I know. Yeah, it does. Yep. And that's basically our drop shadow. So now we have all these different effects that we have gone through and applied to our objects. And I can very easily go in and turn those effects off, get right back to my original objects here, and no harm, no foul. There they are. But that's only just the beginning. So now we know how to apply them and kind of have some idea what it is that they do. How do we use these, or how do we get other layer effects in here to actually make them useful? So I'm just going to increase my canvas size here, and I'm going to give us a little bit more space. What I want to do is I'm just going to create a new layer, and I'm just going to create some kind of cool object. And I'm actually going to, for just the sake of time, I'm going to use one of our pre-made shapes right here for our shape layers. Okay? I could go in and I could draw a shape or paint something on a layer. Layer effects are going to work best when you have a hard edge object. Softer edge objects, you're going to have a real problem with the definition of a lot of these effects. So I'm just going to go in and I'm going to make this heart, and there we go. And now I would like to see just how this effect that I've done here is going to work on my heart. Because of course I have a stroke on here. Yes, so of course it's got to work with the heart. So I go back into that shape right there, and I've got to go in and recreate all this stuff and figure out what I've done. Never going to happen. I'm not going to. I'm just going to copy these effects from one layer to another. So I can do this, and if I just take my word effects here and I grab it and I drag it to a different layer, I'm going to take it from one layer and apply it to a different layer. But if I would like to copy those effects, I go in to, I'm going to click on this word effect right here. I'm going to hold down my Option key, and I'm going to Option click and drag that entire group of effects by clicking on the word effects. Or if I want just the bevel and emboss or just the stroke, I'm going to Option click and drag on whatever it is that I want. And you can see when I do that, I get my little FX nugget right there, and I drop it onto that layer, and that's now going to transfer all of those settings to that specific layer. Pretty cool. I'm going to do one more layer here. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to try something else. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to do, say, the grass here, because I'm going to have a problem with this. I just know it. I'm going to do this on purpose, and we're going to show you some of the other issues that we have. Okay, so there's the green grass of home. Which for those of you that don't live in Seattle, you already know that we've already mowed our lawns. And I'm sure everybody else, like back in New York, they're like, yeah, whatever. Yes, you have 4 feet to shovel to get to your lawns, I understand. So here's the green grass of home. And I would like to apply this horrendous effect on this like mosaic tile thing to this green grass. So I'm going to go to where that one is, which is going to be right there. And I'm going to grab this effect, Option click and drag it on there. And realize, you know, it kind of looks a little bit different. I get that effect right there. And depending on the size of my objects, my effects can really change quite a lot. So when I drag an effect onto an object, I may not get the same thing depending on how much of a shape I actually have. If I were to go in and create just a very basic shape here, go in and just create a little teeny shape right there, and I were to apply a layer effect to that, and actually do that, yeah, I had that. Okay, apply a layer effect to that, and apply something like this to that layer, I wouldn't see as much of it. I get the border around there, but sometimes I don't see the full effect, simply because like the bevel that I do requires a certain amount of distance around there. So I've got all my layer effects, everything's looking really good. But how do I capture these? How do I use these? How do I send these to somebody else? How do I make everything this deliciously awful? Well, that's where, because these are layer styles, I'm going to go up to my window menu and I'm going to grab my styles panel. Okay? So my styles panel is where I can actually save all of these layer effects in there for future use. So I don't have to remember any of these, because I will not be able to remember any of these. There's no way I could recreate these. So I call up my styles panel, and I realize with my styles panel, oh my gosh, they've already gone to town with all these awesome things. And so I can go in here with my object selected, and I can click on this, and I can get all these like totally awesome things. I should probably make that a little bit bigger so we can see that. And now I can go in and I can click on all these, and these are all styles that somebody has put together with all these mix of items that we have. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is cool. Is there more? Of course there's more. Drop down menu, which I call the cheese grater. Yeah, doesn't it look like a cheese grater? Of course it does. These are all the different styles that are already built into Photoshop, readily available for you to use. So if I tried like the glass button ones, I want to click append so it adds to my existing list of that. And now I've got all these different glass buttons. And it's like, oh, you know, those don't look very interesting. But the thing is, they are very interesting if we go in and we begin to like change the size of our objects or change the orientation of our objects, and we can do some cool stuff with these. You know, I can make those buttons look kind of cool. You can just see all these things. It's like, wow, you know. So I want to know how they actually go in and they do something like this. Okay? Well, every time I click on this style, it puts everything right over here in my effects. It's right there. So it's got this bevel and emboss, but it's got this gradient. Okay, bevel and emboss, gradient overlay. Well, let's see how they do that. Double click on bevel and emboss, and it's like, okay, inner bevel, chisel hard, it's got a depth of that. And let's see, okay, so, you know, what does the depth do? Okay, well, the depth changes that, and oh, I can make that look like kind of, you know, gem-like. It's like, well, that's kind of cool. I like that, you know, chisel hard, chisel soft, smooth edge. Oh, that kind of rounds it out. You can do the size of that. Cool. Okay, and the other one's gradient overlay, and it's like, oh, they use that color. What happens if I use that color? This is how you kind of figure it out. And you see, because any style that you click on right here is going to then go in and just apply it all right in your layers panel. Now, if I have a style right here, and I really like this kind of heart that I've done, I want to take that and I want to save that, or I want to share that. Sure, I can. All I'm going to do is going to click on that layer where I've applied all my layer effects, and I'm going to go under my styles here, and I'm just going to say new style. So I just select my layer, I've got everything on there, I don't even have to remember what I've done because I can't. So I choose new style, and it comes up as the style that I have affected, and it's going to have layer effects, and this is going to say, and I click OK. And now my style has been saved in there, and it's like, well, that looks nothing like it. Well, let's actually see if it does work. Okay, I'm going to go back here to this layer, I'm going to turn this back on, I'm going to click on this layer, and it's like, it works. No way. It's that simple. So any layer effects that you apply in there, just select that layer and just take that, like this one, select that layer, selected, choose new style. I can't type either. There's that one. And if I try that on my layer and I try my new style, that's how it looks. It's got the borders, it's got that little crispy giblies there, and that's how it works. That's how you save your styles. Hundreds of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, you know, all these different ones. Buttons, abstract styles, you know, textures. There you go. There you go. Now we got textures. Ooh, metallic, chunky, you know, earth, ethereal. Ooh, wood grain. Oh, yeah. Formica. Yeah, there we go. That's layer styles. However, now we're stuck with these styles, we're stuck with these shapes, and when I try to go in here and edit them, I know that by editing these styles, I lose the style when I edit them. And that's kind of a pain because it's like, you know what, I kind of like this shape right here. I really like this shape, but I know that if I go in, and this is a pixel-based shape, if I go in with my eraser and I erase those areas, I can create some cool stuff, but there are times where I don't want certain portions of this border or the drop shadow or bevel emboss to apply. The problem is it's a layer effect, so it applies to the entire layer. So that's not very fun at all. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to now go in here, and I really like this drop shadow that I've done, this little dotted crispy drop shadow around there, and I just want to get rid of it on one side. Well, there's no amount of erasing, because I can't just go to this and say, okay, the bevel and emboss or the stroke here. I can't click on the stroke and say, okay, erase the stroke. It doesn't erase. It's based on the pixels there. So this is where I'm going to blow your mind. Okay? I'm going to right-click on my effects, and I'm going to go into the bottom when I right-click on my effects, and I'm going to create layers out of my effects. Because right now, they're just kind of effects. They're not really layers, so I can't edit them. They're all based on my shape. I'm going to go in and I'm going to create layers from these effects. So each and every effect that I have on here is now going to become its own separate layer. So if I go in and I create layers here, and I'm actually going to turn all of these off, so I see just this right there. And I'm going to turn on this white layer at the bottom so we can see just what's going on. So what I did is I broke this out, okay? So now what I have is I broke this out, and this particular layer, which is my shape right here, is no longer has any layer effects on it, okay? I have my layer right here, that's my layer. I have my outer stroke, which is actually now just this dotted border around there, which is now fully editable. And then I also have my inner bevel highlights and then my inner bevel shadows. And it's like, this is really weird because I see all this really freaky stuff. And if you watched last show that I just did, you'll notice here that these little things are layer clipping. So I'm going to unclip these from the layer, and this kind of gets confusing. But the reality of it is that this is what it looks like. This is how Photoshop puts it together. And you're like, what? Yeah, so the texture goes, the whole bevel and emboss goes, and these literally clip, I'm option clicking there, literally clip to this layer. Now, because these are all separate pixel-based layers, if I would like to go in and get rid of my outer stroke, it is now a layer that is editable, and I can go in with my paintbrush and I can actually get rid of a portion of that there. I could go in and I could get rid of that, or if I use a very soft brush at a very light opacity eraser, I could actually go in and kind of erase portions of that texture or that highlight because they are physically turned into pixel-based layers. Unlike my heart, if I were to go in to do my heart right here, then I would have this heart, and I can't do that because my heart is a layer with all of these other things based on the pixels that are there on that layer. So with this, I can't go in and erase anything because they are not physically pixel-based. So going in and breaking those out can be really helpful. And they can be really helpful for doing drop shadows on objects, which we're going to get to.